Matthew 24, 3-35. As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming at the end of the age?" And Jesus answered them, "See that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of the birth pains. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another, and many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations. And then the end will come. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who's on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house. And let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas, for women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in those days, pray that your flight may not be in the winter or on a Sabbath, for then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. And if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Then, if anyone says to you, 'Look, here is the Christ,' or 'There he is,' do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. So if they say to you, 'Look, he's in the wilderness,' do not go out. If they say, 'Look, he's in the inner rooms,' do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming out of the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. From the fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts out its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also, when you see all these things, you know that he is near at the very gates. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away." This is a really long passage. And again, we're going to break it down by looking at two things. The disciples asked two questions. They said, "What will be the signs of your coming? And what will be the signs of the end of the age?" Today we're going to look at the second part, what's the signs of the end of the age, and next week we'll talk about the coming of Jesus, what it's going to look like as well. And both of those things are addressed in this passage. This is actually one of the longest recorded messages, sermons of Jesus, and this is just part of it. It goes on, and we'll be covering those in weeks ahead as well. And so what Jesus has to say about the end of the world is probably one of his longest sermons he has recorded us in the Bible. The disciples knew that the end of the world would come someday. They knew that Jesus was going to go away. They knew that he would come again. And they didn't understand a lot of it, so they asked him, "What are some of the missing pieces? How are we going to know that this is going to happen?" They brought up the question because Jesus had mentioned to them, "See the temple over there? There's going to come a time when that temple is going to be destroyed." So he was telling about something that would happen in the future, and that kind of got them thinking, well, what is going to happen in the future? Tell us more about the future, Jesus. And so here we have part of his answer to a question that troubles us as well. What's going to happen in the future? And we have some answers right here. And every generation thinks that, wow, this is maybe the generation when the world's going to come to an end. I mean, Jesus told his disciples, this generation will not pass away until these things are fulfilled. But those people already died a long time ago. Was Jesus mistaken? What did he mean by that? That's something that I think that maybe just every generation has to live in anticipation of the end. And when Jesus says this generation will not pass away, I believe he's telling us that every generation needs to live in light of these words, because we don't know exactly what generation will literally be the last one that is there. When I started planning this series, I was going to make it 4 weeks long, but as I kind of delved into it, I thought there's no way we're going to be able to cover this in 4 weeks. We're going to make it 9. So the better part of the summer, we're going to be talking about these things. But I hope that by the time it's done, that we have a better understanding about what Jesus has said and what other parts of his word has told us about the end of the world, not so that we could live in fear, but live in anticipation and live in the moment now that God has given us, because we want to live in light of eternity and the fact that there will be an end. There's a lot of curiosity about end times. There's a lot of preachers out there that are trying to put all the pieces together. You can hear them on TV, and they make it sound very, very convincing, because this is happening, that's happening, and they take all these things happening in the world from the newspaper headlines, and it kind of fits together really well, but sometimes it gets really sensational. I know when I was a kid, there were people putting all the events of 1970s together, and I was sure that I was not going to live to see my high school graduation. It all sounded very convincing back then that, hey, this is the end of the world. I mean, the signs of the times were right there. Back in the 90s, people started reading the Left Behind series and thought, oh my gosh, this is how it's all going to play out right here. We're not going to see the year 2000. Y2K, of course. We were all pretty convinced that this could be the scenario for the last times. And here we are, 2016. It hasn't happened yet. I want to be careful that we're not going to sensationalize things, and we're not going to try to connect the dots so tightly that we sound presumptuous that we've got it all figured out. We're going to kind of stick with what Jesus said and just kind of take a look at the world through his eyes and try to come up with ideas back then. Jesus did say, look at the fig tree. You can tell when the harvest is going to come. I mean, with any plant that we plant in our vegetable gardens, our fruit trees, you can tell when the harvest is coming, can't we? And Jesus said there are going to be certain signs that will let us know that the end is near, that the harvest is very, very near. And so those are the things we need to keep our eyes on as we think about things in the future. Are these things going to happen in the near future? Is it going to happen in our lifetime? Is it going to happen for our kids or for our grandkids? We don't know. They may be standing here 40 years from now saying this very same thing that we're saying here today. So we don't know for sure, but we want to keep our eyes open. Jesus said, keep your eyes open for these things. And that's why we're spending time this summer taking a look at this. We definitely know that we live in a time when things are happening very quickly. I mean, just the speed of the processes and the things that are happening, they happen before our eyes, and we can't even get from the last drama to the next one without just shaking our heads going, what's going on here around the world? We can't keep up with it all. It helps that we have so much technology and we know everything going on, but because we see all these things happening, we know that things are speeding up a bit. And the idea that we could be approaching the end at a quicker pace may be a very valid consideration. But in this passage, Jesus says there's 9 things that we need to look at that can be signs of the end of the age. And if we list them here, and we'll go through them here, I've got them on 2 screens so they don't fit on one. We have false Christs and false prophets, wars and rumors of war, famine, earthquakes, Christian betrayal and persecution, a falling away spiritually, Christ will be preached worldwide, lawlessness, and this abomination of desolation. We'll get to that in a minute if you're wondering what that means. But these are 9 things that we find in this passage. So let's just take a look at these 9 things. How do they line up with things today? Does it look like we're near the end or not? Because Jesus says these are the signs we need to look for if we're talking about the end of the age. So we'll kind of look at these real quickly. The first one, false Christs and false prophets. Now, occasionally somebody comes up and says that they're Jesus, or there's some wacko sort of cult that comes out there, but we don't really hear people right and left saying, Jesus has appeared. He's here on the earth right now. He's already come back. But there will come a time when it sounds like that's going to be a commonplace, that there are going to be many false Christs, people claiming to be the Christ has returned, and get everybody up in an uproar about it. But Jesus says, if somebody comes and says that they're the Christ, don't believe them. And they're actually going to deceive many. And we sit here today and we go, I wouldn't believe that. I mean, if somebody showed up in New York City or Germany or China or whatever and said, hey, I'm Jesus, I've come back to collect my flock. We sit here now and go, I would never believe that, but it sounds like there's going to be a time when people are going to be very convinced. Whatever they do through their signs and wonders, they're going to look pretty convincing, and people are going to start thinking, maybe Jesus did come back, and he's right there in New York or Germany or China or wherever. Maybe he really did. Now, we don't really have that happening yet today. We don't have too many false prophets pointing, hey, there's Jesus over here, over there. So this is something that we need to keep an eye on. If we start seeing these things happen, then we know we might be getting near the end of the time. But we don't really see that yet today. So that would be one thing I would say, I don't think we're there yet. Wars and rumors of wars. Well, definitely, this is something that you read the newspaper, you watch the news, we're very aware of. If you look at the 20th century, it was one of the most bloody centuries in all of history. This guy named Stephen Elliott explained it this way. Waning empires in their death struggles, countries and ideologies vying for supremacy, major powers using surrogates as chess pieces, peoples and tribes seeking payback for earlier offenses, and each acting out their fractious nature and temper, person against person, neighbor against neighbor, poor against rich, uneducated against the intelligentsia, ethnic and religious and social groups, all standing against one another. I mean, that pretty much describes the 20th century, and into now as well, because we have wars and rumors of wars happening throughout the earth. And more rumors of war come as each day goes by, and I would say that's definitely, we would agree, that's a characteristic of our modern world and a possible sign that the end is coming soon. Famine. We know that poor nutrition causes nearly half of the deaths in children under 5, 3.1 million children a year. We know that there's about 800 million people in the world who do not have enough food to be able to have a healthy, active life. About 1 out of 9 people on the earth. 2/3 of the malnourished people live in Asia. Of course, there's more people there to be hungry, but it is definitely an issue. If you go to sub-Saharan Africa, 1 in 4 people are malnourished in that part of the world. And it says there's going to be famines. And, we're all trying to work in different agencies to try to make sure people aren't hungry. And I was thinking about this. I thought, well, if we're trying to eradicate world hunger, are we going against the sign of the times? If Jesus says there's going to be famine and people are going to be hungry, and we're trying to feed everybody, I mean, it almost seems, what I mean? There's kind of like 2 different forces going on. Maybe we should quit feeding everybody because it means the end is near. Of course not. We're supposed to keep feeding the hungry, but the reality is, as we keep feeding the hungry, it doesn't sound like we're going to fix the problem. It sounds like it's a problem that's going to be with us, because Jesus says as time comes to an end, there's going to be more and more famine. And there are parts of the world where famine is a normal part of life. We live in a part of the world where that's not. Is there a time that it's going to come that famine is going to be something that's going to happen throughout the earth? Is there going to be something going on with the weather or the climate changes that would cause even fertile ground to not produce enough food? It's one of those things we need to keep an eye on. We definitely have enough food to feed the world. We don't always get it out there, but we know that this is a problem that's going to get worse and worse as time reaches towards the end. Earthquakes. There's a graph here that just shows over the last 100 years the number of magnitude between 6 and 8 on the Richter scale. I mean, if you look at it, I don't know if you can see the little numbers at the bottom, but it starts at 1900 and ends with 2008. Basically, since the year 2000 is when you see those big high spikes up there. So even in the last, this graph ends at 2008. Even in the first 10 years of the new millennia, the increase in earthquakes has been, quite magnified. Maybe that's a sign that we are nearing the ends of the times. Christian betrayal and persecution. A few weeks ago, I shared about the persecuted church as we were studying 2 Timothy. Again, I repeat that every month, an average of 322 Christians lose their life for their faith. 214 church buildings or church property are damaged. There's 772 acts of violence, including beatings, rape, abductions, arrest. 75% of the people in the world live in areas where they are persecuted as a Christian. 75%, 3 out of 4 people on the planet live in a place where being a Christian could cause suffering in their life. So we know that it's not happening everywhere, but it definitely is happening. And Jesus said, as the time reaches to the end, we're going to see more and more of this. We're going to see more and more that being a Christian, no matter where you're at, whether you're in a Christian country or anywhere in the world, that there's going to be more and more persecution of Christians, and that's going to be on the rise. A falling away spiritually, people abandoning their faith. The good thing is that Christianity throughout the world is growing 3 times faster than the population rate. That is great news. That is great news. But we also know that there's a lot of people falling away as well. There are many kids, grandkids, people raised with the faith that end up walking away from it. We know that there's just a wide war out there against faith in God. Whether it's the media, just the philosophy of the world, all these things are trying to extinguish the flames that can be there. And we see that today. And many of us who have lived a long time say, we look back and go, I can't believe that people think like this. We're the minority now. We see a falling away of faith. And so that is one thing that's going to continue to happen as the end of the world comes. The 7th thing, that Christ will be preached throughout the whole world. And that's one of the things I tried to share with the kids today. Even though we presently have about 1/3 of the world that doesn't have access to the gospel, we know that this is changing very quickly, that the gospel is getting out there. Especially with technology and all the things we have, it's very possible to get the gospel out there very easily. Going back to our world population chart, the opportunities for sharing the gospel are huge. There's so many people out there. And there's so many people that need the gospel, and we have a chance to be able to share with. I mean, you think about it. I tried to kind of put the idea, a hint in the kids this morning as I shared, but imagine God up there. He's been watching humanity all these thousands of years. And, it's growing little by little. Imagine now. Man, he's looking down at this planet, and he's just seeing all this busyness going back and forth. And there's just so many people being born, and they're living longer, and there's so many things happening. I just think God must be excited at the potential that more and more people who he loves and he created have a chance to be able to know his love. I piggyback on the things that Corey shared last week about having a heart for the world and being able to see more and more people reached. And that needs to be part of the DNA of our lives as Christians, that we want to be a part of reaching these 7 billion people and making sure that God's name is given the glory throughout the world, and especially in all these places where they've yet to be able to hear. We have a chance now to make a difference, and it's such a wonderful opportunity that God has given us. And so we know that as the gospel reaches to far corners of the earth, then God will say, it's been done, it's been accomplished, and the end of the world can come. So we need to be a part of that. He's kind of relying on us a little bit to make sure that gospel gets out there, and we get to be a part of that. And that's one reason why we want to be able to be involved in the great harvest of the souls, so that we can see God's plans fulfilled. The next thing that we see happening in the end times is lawlessness. Basically, everybody makes their own laws and lives while they want to. And through most countries of the world, it's kind of like that. The corruption, everybody has to protect themselves. Something bad happens, there's not somebody there to protect you in most places around the world. We are so fortunate we live in a place where we have authorities and laws and systems in place that help support us when we go through those hard times. If somebody steps across the boundaries and hurts us, we have ways to be able to deal with that. We're one of the rare places in the world that has that. But there will come a time when people will be like the days of Noah, where they all do what's right in their own eyes. And we see that more and more, even in our own land, where we see the fractions splitting, where people have their own set of right and wrong. And it doesn't matter what the government says, it doesn't matter what the Bible says, it doesn't matter what the parents say, it doesn't matter what the teachers say, it doesn't matter what the policemen say. People still want to do their own thing. And we see that philosophy growing more and more throughout the world, even in places where we live today. How bad is it going to get? We don't know, but Jesus says it's going to get pretty bad. That lawlessness will abound throughout the earth. And the last thing, this big words, abomination of desolation. What this refers to is an event where someone is going to set themselves up as God on the earth. They will enter into the temple of God in Jerusalem in a literal sense and say, I am God, and I want the world to worship me. I want the world to follow me. And this is an event that Jesus says is going to happen. And he talks about it in different places. Sometimes we use the word Antichrist to discuss it, but there will be somebody that's going to come along and capture the hearts of the world, and people are going to look to this person as their salvation, as their God, as the person they are going to follow, and turn their backs on the true living God who deserves to be worshipped. This hasn't happened yet. We don't know when it will happen and who that person will be, but when we see that happen, and it's kind of the climax of everything, when we see this happen, Jesus says, you can be sure the end is about to come. So looking at this list, here we are in 2016. It looks like we're moving there. We're not there yet, so I don't think it's going to happen tonight or tomorrow, okay? We don't have to live in fear that the end's going to come and while we're sleeping tonight, because these things haven't totally happened yet. So I think with confidence, we can live in understanding that we still have time on our side, but we see the hourglass getting slimmer and slimmer with less and less grains of sand up in the top, because all these things seem to be happening, at least in our generation. And Jesus says, look for this. Now, next Sunday, we're going to look at more specifically when Christ returns, because that's the culmination of all this. And what does it mean that Christ is going to return? Is it going to be this rapture sort of thing? What's it going to be? We're going to delve into that whole issue next week. But when I titled this sermon series, Why Worry About the End? You can understand it in two ways. First of all, why should you worry about the end? In other words, don't sit around and panic, okay? We're not going to panic about it. We're not going to be anxious. We're not going to be worried, because God's got it under control, and he says he's going to be with us no matter what goes on. That nothing can separate us from the love of God that's in Christ Jesus through his grace that we sang about today. So why worry about it? We can't panic. But in the other sense, why worry about it? We need to be having open eyes. We need to not ignore it. We need to not just live our life in the day-to-day thinking that it's going to be here, there's going to be new days forever and ever, because there's not. And we don't know when the last day is going to come, when Christ is ready to say, this is it, and I'm bringing things to a culmination. And so, depending on where you're at on that scale, maybe you need to not be panicking, but maybe you need to be a little more alert and worry about it a little bit more. And these can help us think about, how do we live in light of eternity? How do we live in light of the fact that someday it's going to come to a culmination? And how can we be a part of being on God's side in bringing these things to be? When we come